Hi, welcome back. In the video segment today, I'm going to show you how we can install the calligraphy framework without necessarily having a local server installed on your machine. And typically, calligraphy, if you followed the first video, needs a PHP and MySQL server running on Apache. So now, if you don't have all this setup on your local machine, Calligraphy does provide you with a quick and easy way to run it without necessarily having to build your own local machine. So let me walk you through how you would do this, and it's typically using what we call Docker, which is another service very similar to GitHub, if you may, except that it would allow you to install images of cloud servers that you could use directly from your own machine. So I'm going to walk you through how it's done, and Calligraphy provides all the tools that are necessary for you to make this happen. Now, of course, you are going to need Docker, and the best way to get Docker is to actually go to the Docker website and then download the framework directly from there, whether you have a Mac or you have a Linux system or even a Windows system, a PC. You could always get the appropriate distribution for your machine, and then you can easily follow the exact same instructions that we will be doing together in the video today. So right now I do have Docker already installed. I have actually a fresh installation of it, and once it's started, it looks a little bit like this. Okay, so there's this concept of containers, and within that container there are images of potential configurations and machines that live within that container. You don't need to worry about any of this, just because Calligraphy makes it very easy for you to run a Docker container with all the necessary images and and configurations that you need in order to run Calligraphy. Okay, I'm just showing it for you because at some point, once we go through the Calligraphy scripts, some things will appear in that Docker dashboard that I will point out once we get to it. So I'm going to go ahead and close it for the time being. Now, when you're, I'm gonna probably show you two different use cases which may apply to you. The first use case is if you do have PHP and Composer installed locally on your machine, which might be the case. So if you have them there, if you have them on your Mac or on your PC or even on your Linux, then all you need is Docker, and then the rest is done automatically for you. Okay, and then I'm going to show you the second use case, and that is if you do not have any of the PHP server or even, of course, MySQL or Composer installed on your machine. Then in that case, of course, you cannot necessarily do the full programming locally, but this situation might happen if you need to just run calligraphy to on production, for example, or if you want to run calligraphy to just make some slight code changes here and there. We wouldn't necessarily recommend it if you want to heavily program in PHP. Then in that case, we definitely recommend that you have a local PHP, at least the PHP language, installed on your local machine along with Composer. Okay, but I am going to show you both and how both of them, both set up, whether you have PHP or you don't have PHP, how you can still run calligraphy using Docker. So let's go ahead and start doing that. Now, what I would first like to point out is that I do have a LAMP server, so I do have an Apache PHP server, which, by the way, is described heavily in the first video that you find on this documentation. However, my Apache server is currently turned off. Okay, so now if I go, for example, localhost over here, nothing is happening just because my server is not running. And I'd like to point this out to you because everything that I'm going to be doing, you will see that it does not need this Apache server at all. So I'm going to go ahead and close it entirely. Okay, and now let's proceed with the instruction. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and open my terminal to show you this first use case. And my first use case is I do have PHP locally installed. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do PHP version for you to see that I do have PHP locally on my machine. And I do have Composer. So I'm going to do the same thing, get the version for Composer in order for you to also see that I do have Composer on this machine. Okay, so I am in that first use case where I do have the language PHP and I do have Composer both installed locally. Okay, notice that I did not need MySQL at all. Okay, and that's another good thing with this way of working is that you do not need to set up MySQL locally just because it comes prepackaged with Docker or with the Docker image itself. So now let's go ahead and follow the instruction. What I'm going to be doing, of course, we're going to go to our to the calligraphy code base over here, and I'm going to get the code. Okay. Now you may or not have Git. I will leave it up to you. In my case, I do have Git, so I can download it through Git. But if I don't have Git, you can also download it using the zip file and download it locally on your machine. Let's use the Git just for the sake of the argument over here. So I'm going to first go to where I would like to save this file. So I'm going to go ahead and clone the GitHub URL of the calligraphy quill, and I'm going to call it or let's do it after today. So we're going to do test 06, and today is June 23rd. Okay, so we're going to create a folder where it's going to install all the calligraphy files in there. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, I'll give it a couple of seconds over here until it gets us this entire code structure. All right, we're almost there. Next thing, and I will introduce probably the next thing that I'm going to be doing by the time it's done. Now I'm going to go to my folder over here that got created. I'm going to just list it for you to see that it got exactly the code structure that you see on GitHub so far. And simply what I'm going to go ahead and do, I'm going to do .bin/calligrapher. Okay, Calligraphy, remember, is the command line tool that is provided out of the box with Calligraphy. And that's one way of calling it. And what I'm going to do, I'm gonna initialize. Okay, and let's see what it's going to do once I do that. So notice it's going to be installing, but I'm going to walk you through it. What it says is it seems that you have downloaded Calligraphy directly from GitHub, which is exactly what we did. We did not use Composer at all. Okay, you could have used Composer, but we did not in this particular case. I got it through Git, and then it started installing all the dependencies that we need. Great. So now that it's done doing that, and it installed all the dependency that we need, what we're going to do is run the second statement that is going to be key, which is running the server itself. So I'm going to go ahead and say call Calligrapher again and say server start. And now watch what's going to happen. That's the statement that the documentation talks about over here, which is going to run Docker. Okay, so now it's going to go ahead and install all the virtual images for MySQL, for PHPMyAdmin. Basically, it's going to set up a server for you in the cloud. Okay, well, supposedly it's in the cloud, but the image is actually locally on your machine. So it's going to do all that magically behind the scenes for you, and then it's going to go ahead and start a server for you to use and to run the calligraphy code. So let's give it a couple of seconds and see what the result of all this is. It's a process that might take a little bit of time. It's building the machine, to be able to run calligraphy. So it's installing all the dependencies and everything for you. And once it's done, it's telling you that now the calligraphy server is successfully started, and it gives you the the host name and the URL that you need to use. So now if I go and copy the host name, and I put it in here in my browser, you will notice that now in a couple of seconds calligraphy is going to run. Okay, maybe the first time it might take a little bit of time to do that, and here we go. Okay, so now calligraphy is running. This is our homepage in Calligraphy. Okay, that is given to us out of the box, and as you can see, now it is running locally through our Docker. Let me go ahead and take a look at Docker to show you how the dashboard now looks like of Docker itself. You will notice that now there is container that was created for us, which has exactly the same name as our folder, and it's running. If you want to see the services that are running in there, you will see that it has, the what we call the dev box, and inside that dev box, this is where PHP is running and so on, and then you have a MySQL server, and then you have a PHP myadmin that also comes out of the box for you. So let me go back in here, and if you want to access the PHP myadmin that is given to you, then you would also take it on port 8077, and the credentials for it are root and root. And notice that from here, not only you have Caligraphy running, but you have Caligraphy running along with a MySQL server behind the scene that you can control through a PHP myadmin. Okay, so this is all you need actually to start coding. And then you have the PHP language itself. So by opening any editor that you would like, okay, your files are locally stored in the test 0623. So let's go ahead and see the files right now. Okay, and I'm gonna go to test 0623. I'm gonna open that folder, and then you are gonna start programming and developing in this folder, similarly to what you typically do if you had a local server. Let me prove it all for you. So I'm gonna go to my routing over here. If you want to know what I'm doing, please continue watching all the videos that are in there. So one of the routes is hello world, that outputs hello world for you. I'm gonna go ahead and change that. Okay, and I'm gonna say this is a test with Docker locally. Okay, something like that. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna now go back to my 8080, and I'm gonna do hello world, which ideally should output the string that we just changed, which is this is a test with Docker locally. Notice that my server is running in this new Docker image, but it's serving the files that are locally on my machine, which is a great way to do development without necessarily worrying about installing or setting up or even configuring an Apache server locally. All right. So that is great. Now at any point in time, you can go ahead and stop that server. Okay, we'll go through somehow the same mechanism to completely stop it. I'm going to do that, and now your Caligraphy server is stopped. So if I try to connect to it again, to connect to my local host, it will not work anymore. Now let's go back to the Docker, because now the dashboard will give you the status of it, and it tells you that it exited. It's no longer there, right? And at any point in time, if you hit any bottlenecks or things don't seem to be running smoothly, I strongly advise you to completely delete that container, okay, and start all over again, and then just follow the exact same instructions again and rebuild the machine in case you are facing any trouble. Now notice that was the container, but the container needs some images, meaning images being the services being run behind the scene. So all those are also installed, okay? And there are images because every time you run the server again, you don't need to necessarily rebuild the machine. So let me go ahead and start them. You will notice that the second time around, it will be way faster, just because the MySQL, the PHP, and all of the builds were already done. So did you notice it barely took a couple of seconds to run the server? Why? Because everything has been already cached in the Docker for you. All right. So now let me go ahead and stop it. So that was use case number one. Use case number one is great if you do not want to handle an Apache server, if you do not want to handle a MySQL, and if you don't want to install a local version of a LAMP or a MAMP or XAMPP server on your machine. Okay, it could work very well for you, and you can continue doing your development the same way you would typically do if you had a local server. The second use case that I'm going to show you is if you do not have anything installed on your machine other than Docker. So for that, and in order to show you that, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to go to DigitalOcean, which is another service that can provide you with virtual machines, virtual machines that you can set up to your liking. And I already set up a machine that has a distribution of Ubuntu in it, okay, which is a Linux system if you are not familiar with it. But I'm going to go ahead and control it from my terminal, okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to SSH to that machine over here. Okay, so now I am in that machine that is given to me by, by DigitalOcean. You can use, by the way, any other server provider that does the same thing. So we're not necessarily, bound to DigitalOcean in any way. Okay, any virtual machine that has a distribution of any operating system that you want. Now I'm giving you the example of Ubuntu, but you can use any other distribution. And on this machine there's nothing. So if I do PHP version, for example, you will notice that there is no PHP on this one. Okay, PHP not found. Same thing if I do Composer, also it does not have Composer. So this is an example of a machine that doesn't have a server. So there's no Apache or anything running in there. It does not have a PHP, and it does not have a Composer. It does have a Git though. Okay, why? Because most of the Ubuntu distributions do come with Git already installed in them, which is great because it would allow us to immediately download the code if we want to. Okay, which is what we're going to do together as well. The second thing that is in there on this machine is that it does have Docker. So I did go through the steps to install Docker, which, by the way, is a couple of instructions, so it's very easy to do. All you need to do is app install docker.io, and it will install it for you. Okay, but right now I have it, so I'm not going to run it. And the second thing that we need is what we call Docker Compose. So I also installed it. So if I do Docker Compose and version, you will see most likely I will get the version of Docker Compose. And you will get Docker Compose in the exact same way than Docker, okay, by using apt install. Two instructions, very straightforward. You just need to run them, and once you have them, the Docker is installed on this on this machine. And that's all you need, because now from this point on you can follow exactly the same instructions that we followed earlier, but you will notice that there's a slight difference in the way things will get installed. So let's go back and get the Git URL from here, and I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I'm going to clone the Git. Why? Because I don't have Composer, so I'm not going to use the Composer command to install the distribution of Caligraphy. I'm going to clone the GitHub, and I'm going to call it same thing. I'm going to call it, actually first let me go to where I would like to save it, and just to be more organized, I have a directory in there called www, and I'm going to install it in there. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and clone again. Well, let's call it same thing, test 0623, but I'm going to do DigitalOcean, just so that we see the difference. And I'm going to run this command, and it's going to do exactly what it did locally on our machine, except now we're doing it on the image, and we got the distribution. So now if I go to test 06do and I do a listing, now I see the exact same structure of Caligraphy Quad. Great. And now we're going to do similarly to what we've done earlier. I'm going to go ahead and start the server immediately. I don't need to do initialization or anything like that. I'm going to go ahead and do server start. And notice, it's going to start building everything that we need in order to run Caligraphy. And that would include, again, all the server stuff, the languages, Composer, anything that is needed for me to run the entire setup. Okay, so let's give it some time to finish. It might need, a minute or so, maybe a little bit less. And once it's done, what I want you to remember is that at the end of this, you don't have the language. So PHP is still not there for you, and neither of the languages are there, and neither is Composer. Okay, so every time you're actually making a change, or if you want to make a change on the code, it's gonna go through the exact same process again and rebuild it for you. So such a situation is not necessarily ideal for development, but it's definitely great if you want to make slight changes to the code, or if you want to make, or if you happen to be on a machine where you don't necessarily want to have a coding or an entire programming setup on that machine, that could give you a quick way of doing that. Okay, so let's have it finished. Notice that here in the background, it's actually installing everything that you need, including the server. Okay, so it's really giving you an entire development setup and an entire development machine um, to run the code for you. Okay. So by the time it gets there, what we definitely need for this is the IP, okay? Because we are going to need it to test out from our browser and to see whether the machine is whether Calligraphy was installed properly. Okay. So this is a great production code or even pre-production if you are familiar some of the development cycles. It could be a great, a great mechanism to test a pre-production environment that is accessible in public through the internet. Okay, I like to do things live. Now, some things might take a little bit of time. Meanwhile, the exact same commands still apply. Okay, so you can do server start, server stop, and once everything is done and set up for you, it's going to tell you exactly which ports to use and how to access everything. All right, we're almost there, and here we go. All right, so now it said Calligraphy server started. It gave me the host name. Notice that in this situation, we need to replace the local host with the new. So I'm going to keep this because the local host is the same. The port is the same, but I'm going to copy the name of the machine or the IP of the machine, and I'm going to replace localhost with this. Okay, and let's go ahead and run and see what happens. Of course, depending on some of the IPs, it might go ahead and tell us that, or Google Chrome might complain about it, but don't worry. You can say visit the unsafe site, and here we go. Now we have Calligraphy running. Okay, now that is great. Notice that what we did in here. That server is out there. It's running PHP for us. It's running everything that Calligraphy needs. Okay. Same thing if I do AT77. Of course, Chrome will complain about it again, depending on what the IP is. But we're going to go ahead and visit the site. You will also get a PHP MyAdmin, meaning that behind the scene there is also a MySQL server ready for you to use. Okay, and you can create your databases the way you would like. Now going back to my terminal, at any point it says here that I could go ahead and exit it. Yes, indeed, so I can exit it, but notice that it is still running. Okay, so if I go here, go back to my 8080, my server is still running. Keep that in mind, okay? So it's not because you quit that the server is no longer running. You will need to stop it explicitly. So this is great for production again. Like this, you do not need to get a production server that has all the server installation and stuff. You could use this imaging tool and Docker that would do all this for you in a couple of lines of code. Okay, so I would definitely recommend to use Docker for production purposes. If you don't want to have at all the local server, you don't want to have PHP locally, and you don't want to have Composer locally, that's also another way for you, for you to use and to develop if you're okay with that. Notice that any development that you do at this stage of the game, you will need to do it, of course, on the machine itself. So using these the files that you have there. And at any point in time, every time you make a change to the code, you need to go back and run the server again. So let me show you a little bit something. I'm going to go ahead and stop it. Okay, and I'm going to open at the same time another terminal window. Here we go, and I'm going to also connect to the same machine in parallel. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start the server again. And let's do start. So I'm going to use 1 to start the server. Notice that it will be quick the second time around because same concept as what we've seen locally, right? All of the images have already been installed, whether it's MySQL, whether it's PHP, so everything has been already installed, so you don't need to worry uh, about doing that again. This is why it's quicker. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and press enter again here. Great, so we've got it, and it's running. Now let's see. Let's say I want to make a change to something. So I'm going to go to my test over here. I'm going to open Nano on one of the files from my application. I'm going to do exactly what I've done, earlier locally. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to routing, and in here I'm going to do nano web dot php. Okay, what I'm going to do is the following. I'm going to change the hello world route and say that this is coming from the virtual machine. This is from the virtual machine. And now I want you to take a look at what happened on the right side over here. It noticed that there are some changes to the files that we made in the application folder, and it's going to ask you to recompile by pressing 1, and that's what I did. I pressed 1, and now it's going to have to recompile in order to take on these changes. Okay, that. And now I run it. Great. I do hello world, and this is from the virtual machine. Okay, so it's again, is it the best way to do programming? Most likely not, but it definitely helps if you want to do quick changes, and of course it will help you a lot in the case of preparation of pre-production and production. And if sometimes there are some slight changes between your production server and and your development server, then it could help you a lot. This is take 2 over here. Do that, save it. Same thing, it's asking you to recompile. You can rebuild, and once you rebuild, here we go. Now I can go back here. Now it should say 2, and here we go. Okay, so those are 2 completely different methods of using Docker based on whether or not you want to have a PHP setup, MySQL setup, and depending on what level of setup you want to have locally, you could use one or the other. But one thing is sure is that it makes the whole server setup a lot easier, and it makes it quicker for you to get started very quickly on using Caligraphy. We hope you like it. We hope this was instructive for you, and stay tuned for more videos. Have a great day.